Okay, so today we're going to go over adhesives a little bit, and we're going to get into sanding, and we'll maybe get into some finishing. So these are all the adhesives that we may or may not use in this class. Now the first one right here, PVA, this is polyvinyl acetate. This is our tight bond. This is what we're really going to use. So this is used for general woodworking. Most of the time you're not going to want to use it for outdoor use because it is water soluble, low to moderately resistant to water. And while that's fine for inside, you're not spraying a hose in your house, I hope. It's just not going to hold up very well to the elements outside. So if we're using PVA, it's going inside our house. Okay, now right here we have open and working time. These are two different things. Open means that if I pour out the glue onto a surface and just let it sit there, it's going to start to cure in about 3 to 5 minutes. Now this depends on the kind of glue, the type of PVA, because we do have some separate types. When it comes to tight bond, we have tight bond 1, tight bond 2, and tight bond 3. Now tight bond 1, that's what we use here in the shop, on our cricket tables and on our writing desks and everything else that we make. We're generally using tight bond 1. That's because it sets pretty quickly. We don't have to clamp it for a really long time. It's really cheap compared to other glues and compared to other PVA glues, and it just works really, really nicely. It's really simple, doesn't take any extra care to use it. Tight bond 2 is going to be slightly more water resistant, and it's also food grade safe, indirect food grade. So that would be great to glue up a cutting board. So if we're making a cutting board, we'll have to use some tight bond 2. Tight bond 1 would work, but it's not food safe. So that's why we'd want to go the tight bond 2 route. Tight bond 3 is a lot more water resistant, and it actually takes longer to set. Okay, so the working time for tight bond 1 is about 10 minutes is all. That's not very long when it comes to clamping. When you've got all your clamps ready to go and you're gluing stuff up, you got to move pretty quick to get in that 10-minute time. Now the tight bond 3, that has a working time, I've seen it work up to 30 minutes. And that it depends on the temperature, and that's true for all glues. But 30 minutes, that's a long time to play with. So if we're using tight bond 3, we're going to be using that for a very complex glue up. Maybe for the writing desk when we're gluing our legs together, we'll probably need to use some tight bond 3. Now this clamp time, 1 to 2 hours. Again, that depends on what's being clamped, how much stress that piece is going to be under. Are we machining it afterwards? What kind of machining are we doing? Can depend on the kind of glue as well. If it was tight bond 3, I'd probably leave it in the clamps a little shorter than tight bond 1, just because I trust tight bond 3 a little bit more to hold up. Now, this clamp time does not mean that it's ready to go right out of the clamps. If I'm clamping together a panel, and then I want to go and plane it down, I'm going to leave those in the clamps overnight, just to be sure. Because the last thing I want to have happen is a panel exploding in the planer and ruining my work, and it's not safe, mess to clean up. So most of the time we're going to try and leave our things in the clamp overnight. Or at least not machine them until the next day after we glue them. Shelf life. This is referring to how long the glue lasts over a period of time while it's in the bottle. So 1 to 4 years. Again, this depends on the brand. It depends on the type of PVA. It depends on the temperature that it's stored at, the size of container it's stored at. But 1 to 4 years is typically, I mean, you look down the list, you see 1 year. After a year, you better check and make sure it's good. Now I have a little bottle of Titebond 2 that I got my freshman year at BYU, and that glue is still good. Now it's a really small bottle, and I've kept it stored in a dry place, low humidity, in a in a closet with temperature control and all that. So that's why that's lasting a little bit longer. Water resistance, we talked a little bit about this before. Low to moderate. It cleans up with water, so if you get a little bit on your clothes, sometimes you can get that out with some water, at least get most of it out. But if you get some on your hands, just go wash your hands with some warm water or maybe some soap, and that'll clean it up really quick. So low to moderate if you glue a panel and then go set it under water for a couple nights, it's going to fall apart. Health concerns, low. It's a pretty safe glue, really. Even if it's not food grade safe, I mean, you wouldn't want to eat it, but it's not gonna, the fumes and things from it, they're not gonna hurt you very bad. Gap filling. Now, PVA, when it's gluing together, it actually shrinks together. And that can be a good thing because we want it to pull the joint together and hold tight. But if you're going to try and use this to fill a big gap, maybe you're doing a mortise and you messed up and cut your tenon really small and you want to be able to fill that gap, PVA is not going to do it for you. There's no way. Does not gap fill. And like I said, over here with the miscellaneous, working time, clamping time, it varies with the brand and the level of the brand. So Titebond 1, Titebond 3. Titebond 3 is going to give you a little bit longer to work with. Okay, moving on down to polyurethane glue. A polyurethane is different than PVA in that when you use polyurethane glue, it expands. Now this can be good, and it can also be bad. If we're working with a really small joint, or maybe you're gluing together a pen blank to turn on the lathe, you can do that, but you need to be really, really careful that you don't use too much polyurethane because if you use too much, it's going to expand a little too far and it might pop your wood and crack it. So it's usually not a great one to use in that situation. Now, you can use it in general woodworking most of the time. Laminations, it's really nice for laminations because it fills in those gaps and makes it a smooth lamination. It does have a little bit more working time, so it can be nice for complicated assemblies. But really where it shines is for dissimilar materials. So if you need to glue some metal to wood, maybe you're doing a drop-in drawer pull without screws, or maybe you turned a drawer pull on a metal lathe and you'd like to glue that in there, you can do that. It'll glue together. PVA will only work, it's only going to work wood to wood. Polyurethane will work wood to metal, wood to plastic, metal to plastic. It's Gorilla Glue. That's the brand that we're going to be using, Gorilla Glue. Works really well. Probably won't use it a lot in this shop, just because we're working with wood primarily. Now, when we get into some turning in more of the advanced classes, we might use a little bit of polyurethane glue to glue some metal to some wood for some hardware. But If we ever get into laminations, we'll use polyurethane glue. But really, dissimilar materials. It does have some pretty decent working time, 15 to 30 minutes. Now if we jump over here to the miscellaneous section, it says moisture is a catalyst. Now if you take a little fine spray mist bottle and you just mist that surface that you're gluing and then put the polyurethane on and glue it together, it's going to cure a little faster. That moisture just kind of sets it off and it'll cure pretty quick. Now polyurethane glue does have a pretty long clamp time. If you're using polyurethane glue, I would clamp it and leave it overnight. And honestly, for most of these glues, that would be my recommendation. Just leave it overnight. Just let it be. Okay. Now some of them will go down to 4 hours and that's fine, but why chance it? Shelf life, like I said, 1 year. That's pretty set standard for glues. It is really water resistant. It has soap and water, acetone, and denatured alcohol cleanup. So just water is not going to clean it up for you. You're going to need more than that. Health concerns. If you have asthma or other respiratory issues, polyurethane is something that you may want to steer clear of. We've got some moderate health concerns. You'll want to use ventilation, maybe a respirator while using it, especially if you have respiratory concerns and have to use it for whatever reason. That's another reason why we don't use it a lot in here, because if we're just doing general woodworking, why take the chance of somebody getting sick because they don't have a respirator on or because they have some underlying health conditions that maybe they don't even know about? PVA is going to be a lot safer. Now it does expand, so it does gap fill a little bit, but it's a little foamy, so it's not super strong. Kind of expands into a foam. Like I said before, be really careful with those tight joints, because if it's too tight fitting as you put them in there, and again I'm going to refer back to a mortise and tenon, if you're trying to fit that tenon into the mortise and it's really tight, polyurethane might be just enough to split that mortise, and then you're going to be starting over. And you got to clean up the mess, and it's just a hassle. So be really careful with that. Alright, down to epoxy. We've got a couple different kinds of epoxy. We have 2-part epoxy, 5-minute epoxy, overnight epoxy. Now 5-minute epoxy does not mean that it's ready to go in 5 minutes. That means that it cures in 5 minutes. So this is not something that you would want to use for a really complicated glue up. No, don't do that. This is something you're going to use when, I need to stick a dissimilar material, maybe, like I said, a drawer pull, into my drawer front. That's going to be a really quick one. Put the epoxy on, put it in, you're done. Of course, you got to clamp it, but it's going to be really water resistant. It dries in almost a plastic. Okay, some epoxies you can use on as a finish. So tabletop epoxy, bar top epoxy. You see floors finished with epoxy. We're going to refinish the workbenches with epoxy at the end of the year. So it's pretty versatile. You can do river tables where you fill a big huge gap with epoxy, and it's going to work really well. But for gluing, where it shines is for dissimilar materials, and if you're doing anything outside, because it's going to hold up really well to water. It's going to last a long time out in those elements. So open and working time, it's going to either be really, really fast or you'll have quite a bit to work with it. Okay, with the two-part epoxy, you mix the two parts together and you've got about 30 minutes where you can manipulate your joints, and you can, if you're doing any sort of finishing, you can touch places up, move the epoxy around so that it will cover everything that you need it to cover. But again, 30 minutes might seem like a long time, but it's amazing how quickly that can go. Clamping time, 1 to 15 hours. Again, depends on the type. 5-minute epoxy, could probably get away with an hour. If it's two-part or overnight epoxy, maybe give it a little longer. Again, never hurts to wait overnight. When I'm gluing things up, I actually like to be able to kind of wrap it up there and move on to something else, or just be done for the day. I think it's a great stopping point to kind of recollect yourself on the project, take a step back, adjust where you need to adjust, and kind of have a reset. Shelf life, 2 to 3 years. Obviously, if you mix two-part epoxy, it's not going to last 2 to 3 years. It'll last 30 minutes. But if they're kept separate, it'll last quite a while. And that's true for 5-minute epoxy as well. Again, good idea to check it after a year, see if it's still working, see if it's still good, and then you can go ahead and hold on to it. Like I said, very water resistant. You're not going to be able to clean it up with water. You're going to have to use lacquer thinner, acetone, denatured alcohol. Health concerns, moderate. Again, avoid inhaling the vapors, and that's true for all glues. If you're sniffing glue, we've got other problems to talk about. But it really does give you a pretty good headache working with this stuff. If you're working right down with it, you gotta be careful. Put on a respirator, put on a mask, make sure you've got a good fan going, some ventilation. Maybe glue it in the spray room with the big fan going. It is excellent for filling gaps because it does not shrink at all. It stays where it's at. It's not going to expand, it's not going to shrink. It just sets. And that is so nice to be able to do that and not have to worry about it cracking your wood or overflowing or running off the table or whatever it is that you're finishing. This is the best adhesive for long-term dissimilar material gluing and gap filling too. Because it doesn't expand, it doesn't contract. It's excellent for filling gaps. And it's going to hold up a really long time because when it cures into a plastic. And you can actually buff epoxy into almost a mirror finish, really. It's amazing how well it holds up over time. There's a reason that they use it for tabletops and for floors and for bars, because it holds up to the abuse that it gets put to. Now down here we have cyanoacrylate. You might know it as super glue. I will often call it CA glue. CA, cyanoacrylate. This is good for quick repairs, light gap filling, and I use it a lot in wood turning to glue a pen tube into a pen blank. That's the number one glue for that because it's not going to expand. It's not going to not hold it. It's going to bond pretty well to those dissimilar materials. Now over here you see it's not a long-term, really strong bond. So it's, for a pen, yeah, that's okay. You're not going to be, a pen is pretty small. It doesn't take a lot to hold it together. But I would never use this to glue a blanket chest together. That's ridiculous. I can't even imagine doing that. That would be, no, don't do it. Okay, if you're gluing a blank chest, use some PVA, polyurethane, okay, cyanoacrylate, small stuff. Okay, quick repairs. Maybe you've got a, oh, I don't know, maybe your little brother's playing with a screwdriver or a hammer and he chips something out on your cricket table top. Bring it in. If we can, we'll try and use some PVA glue to fix it, maybe some polyurethane. But if it's just something really, really quick, really small, we'll just take some CA glue, stick it on there. And what's great about it is it's done, cured, finished in 2 minutes. Maybe 3, but usually about 2 minutes, especially if you use an activator. Here with the working time, if you're using, and there's different levels of CA glue. There's thin, medium, thick. They've got some really thin stuff for finishing. If you're using the thick stuff, you've got about 60 seconds to work with it. I wouldn't risk that. I'd try and get it together as quick as I could. If you're using thin, shoot, you've got, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 seconds before it's done. If you use an activator, we have a special spray that we can spray on it, and that accelerates it even more. So it's, 5, 10 seconds, it's done. And there's not much you can do about it after that. So you have to be sure that you want to accelerate it before you accelerate it. A light gap filling. This is also a really good use for it because if you're using, you can use wood putty to fill gaps and it works fine. That would be good for cabinetry. But if you're doing furniture, some really nice high-end furniture, or maybe some wood turning, you're going to want to use some cyanoacrylate or epoxy. Now the CA glue, the cyanoacrylate, that would be really good for really small gaps. And what's nice about this CA glue is you can use the thin to penetrate into the wood. It soaks into the wood really, really quickly, and that's great. And then you can come back with some medium or some thick to fill in that gap, and that's going to strengthen the overall gap. So if you've got a little tiny crack in a pen blank and you want to fill it, we can fill it pretty well with some CA glue. Now, if you're talking about filling a big knot in a tabletop, maybe turn to some epoxy. Don't fill it with polyurethane. That looks terrible. Use some epoxy. Maybe mix in a black dye, looks really good, and make it look nice. Okay, clamp time for CA glue under 2 minutes. Doesn't take long. When you're gluing pen blanks, you can put the CA glue on the tube, put it in the blank, spray the activator, and you're ready to go in about 1 to 2 minutes. Doesn't take long. Shelf life, like I said, about a year for all glues. Water resistant, low to moderate. Now this is when used as a glue. So don't take your pen that you glued up with some CA glue and go dunking it in water. Now if you use it as a finish on your pen, and that's really the only time that we're going to use it as a finish, is for pens. You're not going to use CA glue to finish a dining room table. That's going to be, first of all, really expensive. Second, you're probably going to get a lot of exposure to these toxic fumes. When used as a finish on a pen or another small project, if you splash some water on there, it's not going to hurt it. Cleanup is with acetone. When you glue your fingers together using CA glue, we're going to use acetone to help clean that up. Okay, high toxic fumes. If you're gluing a pen blank, when this cures, especially if you use an activator, sometimes you'll see little wisps of smoke rising from the gluing area. If that stuff gets in your eyes, you will be crying for quite a while. I can tell you that from personal experience. It hurts a lot. Okay, it hurts your lungs, it hurts your eyes, hurts your nose, hurts your mouth. It just, oh, it's not fun. And obviously, it'll stick your fingers together really, really quick. If you get some CA glue on a finger, wipe it on the bottom of a table. I like to wipe it on my jeans because I don't care about my jeans. But if you stick it to another finger, or you stick it to your pants or to your shirt or to the tabletop, it's stuck there. When we put a lot of pressure on glue, especially CA glue, when you put pressure on it, the curing time goes down. It cures quicker. That's why we clamp stuff. Okay, the clamp time, that's why we clamp it. It cures faster and it pulls the joint together. So it's going to cure faster and it's going to pull your finger tighter to whatever it is you're sticking it to. Gap filling, if you're using thick CA glue, it's okay. It's moderate. I would use it on a turning or maybe a really small knot in a tabletop. But thin CA glue, it's not going to fill the gap. It's more of preparation for filling the gap. And like I said before, not a strong long-term bond, but you could use it as a finish, which is unique. Really, the only ones we're going to use as a finish is CA glue and maybe some certain epoxies. Now down here to hide glue, this comes in a dry or liquid form. Hide glue is made from the hides, bones, tendons of animals. Okay, I know you've heard that glue is made from horses. Well, glue has been made from horses, rabbits, fish. All sorts of animals have been used in the making of glue. It gets into a whole bunch of chemistry stuff, and I'm a woods teacher. That's not my strong suit, but I know that they take these animal parts and they boil them down and turn them into a glue. Now, this is used in veneering, laminations, repairing period furniture and instruments. Now, repairing period furniture, this hide glue, this animal glue, has been used since 2000 BC. A long time. Okay, so I think the ancient Egyptians were kind of onto something when they started using this hide glue to glue things together. I mean, we've seen this in the pharaohs' tombs. We've found this stuff all over the place back then. So if maybe you have a hutch from the 1700s that's been passed down in your family and you need to repair it, you could use some PVA glue. I'd call that cheating. If you want to maintain the integrity of the piece, use what they used. Use hide glue. Okay, and instrument makers, luthiers, okay, people who make guitars, violins, pianos, they really like hide glue because it's super easy to repair. And over here you can see that it's best when future disassembly is required. The reason that it's so nice for that is because when the glue joint breaks, it doesn't really penetrate very far into the wood, so it breaks along the glue line. It's not going to break the wood off. Using PVA, I mean, we've seen this. The glue is stronger than the joint. If you go to break a PVA glued joint, you're going to break the wood. Maybe you get lucky and break along the glue line. You're still pulling wood fibers out. Guaranteed. It's not going to be a clean break. Hide glue, you're going to have a clean break. Working time, you got to move quick. 10 minutes. Doesn't take long. Clamping time, 12 hours. That translates to about overnight. If it's 12 hours, just come back the next day and finish it up. Shelf life, if you have it in a dry pellet form, you can hold on to that forever. Now, if if it's a really humid environment, maybe it's not an indefinite storage, but if it's kept dry and in a dark, cool place, yeah, you can hold on to that for a really long time. If it's in liquid form, a year, check it. Maybe it's good, probably not. Water resistance, it is not very water resistant. Don't use this on a boat. Clean up, we'll use some water. Health concerns are low. Gap filling is poor. And again, best when future disassembly is required. So I don't know if any of you are playing the instruments, but I played the cello in high school. And one of my classmates knocked over a music stand and punched a big hole in the side of my cello. Oh, I was so mad. But when I took it into the shop for the repair to be made, they were able to do it really quickly because they were able to just disassemble, kind of break apart the joint, and then re-glue in a new side panel because it was done with hide glue. Okay, last one, contact cement. This is used for laminate countertops, and you could use it for some temporary bonds too if you just need something to hold on there for a little bit. It's relatively easy to break apart. So working time, contact cement's a little different. You have to let it dry. Like dry. So you'll let it sit for about an hour. Make sure there's not any sawdust getting on it. No sawdust. Then you're going to have a 2 to 3 hour window afterwards where you will then take the two pieces. Okay, you have to do it on both pieces. You'll roll it on there with a roller. After an hour, you'll take the two pieces, carefully lay them on there so they align the way you want them to align. And then you're going to take a J roller and roll. A J roller is just a rubber roller, kind of shaped like a J. You'll take that roller and you'll roll it on there to press those things together. And that's it. You don't have to clamp it, you just use pressure to finish it up. I've taken a laminate countertop. We've prepped it, applied the contact cement, let it dry, set it on there, rolled it real good, finished up some trim, and then went and installed it within an hour. That's what's really nice about it, is it doesn't take very long after you're done rolling it to be able to install it. Shelf life is about a year. It is very highly water resistant. There's a reason that you see it in kitchens. Okay, it holds up really well to water. Lacquer thinner, acetone, denatured alcohol for cleanup. Health concerns, moderate. Avoid inhaling the vapors. It will give you a headache. And in general, that's just a good idea. If you are working with a chemical, try not to breathe it in. Gap filling, poor, really poor. It soaks into the wood. Sometimes it takes 2 coats on if you're working with an MDF countertop with laminate on top, you might want to go a little heavy on the MDF. In miscellaneous stuff, it is heat resistant, and you have to apply it to both surfaces. If you only apply it to one, it is not going to work. Heat resistant, that's interesting because that's why we use it in cabinets. Okay, you wouldn't want to put something that's not heat resistant next to the stove or next to the oven. It'll peel apart. So there's a reason that we use this for our cabinets. All right. That's it for this one. I'm going to go out in the shop and show you a little bit more about what we're going to be using in this class. All right, here we are out in the shop, and I want to make a panel out of these 2 boards here. Now before I go start just spreading glue and clamping things together, I need to make sure that these are prepared. First, I want them to be thicker than my final dimension. Next, I want to have a good jointed edge on both of the edges that I plan to glue together. A joiner is going to give us a cleaner surface, a smoother, flatter surface, and that's going to let glue together a little bit easier. We don't want to have a rough edge. That's not going to glue very well. Okay, so we've got a couple different kinds of clamps here. We have these big I-beam bar clamps. Now we can adjust this down here by moving this trigger either on the back or on the top, like so. And we can slide this up or down, however wide we need. This screw over here is going to tighten the clamp. This is how we're going to get our clamping pressure. This screw gives us a lot of mechanical advantage. So that's an I-beam bar clamp. This is a quick grip bar clamp. We can slide it like this, and then using this big trigger here, we can clamp it tighter as we need it. A little squeaky. Okay, we've got some smaller quick grip bar clamps here. Sometimes you don't need a big, huge clamp. Sometimes all you need is a little guy. It's going to be a lot lighter to carry around with your project, and it's going to take up less room. This is an adjustable bar clamp. You'll notice that it's very similar to this one here, to the I-beam bar clamp. We have some triggers here that we can move and slide this very quickly, and we also have a screw here. That's going to give us some more of that mechanical advantage, a little tighter clamping pressure. Now, this quick grip bar clamp is not going to give us the clamping pressure that this one will. This screw gives us more mechanical advantage, leads to a tighter pressure. This big quick grip bar clamp is not going to give us the clamping pressure that an I-beam bar clamp will. Again, the screw gives us that mechanical advantage. This is a spring clamp. Inside of here we have a spring. That's going to give us our clamping pressure. You can find these in different strengths and different sizes. This is a pretty generic one. Not going to be very helpful in our panel. Not big enough. Okay, we got to make sure we have the right clamp for the job. This one's going to be nice if we're clamping something really small, where we don't need a ton of pressure, we just need it to hold it there. This is a C clamp. It's shaped like a C. We have a screw that will tighten our clamp for us. Between these two, they're both used in similar situations for something a little smaller. The C clamp is going to give us a lot more clamping pressure than our spring clamp will. This is a wooden hand screw clamp. This is going to take some getting used to the first couple times you use it. We can open the jaws up wide, or we can close them tight. Okay, we can angle the jaws by only twisting one of these screws. We can widen the jaws at an angle by twisting them. So it's a really customizable clamp. You can get pressure in just one spot right up at the tip, or you can get equal parallel pressure along the whole jaw of the clamp. Very, very handy. I love using these wooden hand screw clamps. All right, over here to our panel. Here we have the glues that we're most commonly going to use in this class. Here we have some CA glue. We have thick CA and thin CA glue. Remember, thick CA is going to fill gaps a little bit better. The thin is going to penetrate the wood a little bit more. Here we have some Titebond Original. This is Titebond 1. This is relatively cheap. It holds the wood together. It creates a bond that is stronger than the wood itself. So it's really nice to have around in the shop. This is what we're going to be using in our projects. If we're working with a really complicated glue up, we have some Titebond 3 that we can use. But for this panel right here, Titebond 1 is all we need. So we've got a jointed edge. Our boards are thicker than we need them to be. Okay, if I'm taking this down to 0.75, I'm going to want these to be at least 0.82. You got to be a little careful when you're gluing 0.82 together because you don't have a ton of room for sanding. Okay, that's only 7/1000ths of an inch, or 7/100ths of an inch that you get to play with. So I'm going to set these aside and I'll get the clamps ready. While I'm getting the clamps ready, I've got 2 little knot holes right here. I don't love. I want those to be filled. So I'm going to take my thick CA glue and we're going to fill those gaps. Let's see if this will open up here. There we go. So we're just going to fill these up with some thick CA glue. And we'll keep an eye on them and see how well they dry up. Now remember, the thick CA glue doesn't take very long to dry. It's going to take a little bit longer than the thin, but it's going to be pretty quick. Got another little guy here that I'll fill. Now you'll notice that I'm adding to what I've already got going. That's because it's seeping into the wood a little bit. That little knot hole might be a little deeper than it looks. This one looks like it's holding up pretty well. So we'll give those 2 a minute to dry while we're setting up the clamps. Should be done by the time we're done with that. Now, anytime that we are clamping a panel, and this really applies to panels, we want to have at least 3 clamps. So I'm going to set up 2 on the outside, and then I'll keep this one off to the side, and I'll play with that in a minute. That one's going to go right in the middle on the top. Okay, so let's make sure that these are set wide enough. It's always nice to plan ahead before we start spreading glue. Okay, so that looks perfect. And then this one is going to go right over the top like this. Well, let's see how that CA glue is looking. It's getting there. If I had some accelerator, it would be done by now. I don't. You don't need accelerator. It's not the end of the world if you don't have it. So we'll just play while these are drying up. So I've got some Titebond 1 here in this bottle, and I have some glue brushes over here in this little tray. So these are just soaking in some water. Now you don't want to have all this water while we're gluing. So I'm going to go grab a paper towel so that I can properly dry this off. Because any water that we have in the joint is going to affect how strong our joint is. Because Titebond is water soluble, meaning that water is used to clean it up. And if water is used to clean it up, well, we don't want water inside our joint breaking down that glue surface. So we'll dry off our brush a little bit. That looks a lot better. And the reason that I have this soaking in water is so that it's easy to clean up. If you take this after you're done wiping glue with it and you just set it down, that glue is going to harden in that brush and it's going to be a lot harder to clean up. So we'll take our glue here and we're going to apply glue to both surfaces. Usually a good idea. You don't want to have a really thick layer of glue. I usually shoot for a bead that's about 1/8 inch wide, maybe 3/16. Okay, just like that. Now, that's pretty straight. That's a pretty steady glue line there. If it's not very straight, if it's kind of spread around, a little messy, that's okay. Not the end of the world. So I'm going to take this glue, and I noticed that this board is a little shorter than this one. Okay, so I'm going to not worry about the ends so much. I'm going to kind of spread that glue in towards the middle a bit more. That way it's where I want it. Now, when I'm doing this, this is not good enough. I need it to be completely spread, edge to edge, face to face. All right, so you see the difference there between here and there? This is going to be good. This will be maybe good, but we want to be sure. We want to make sure that it's spread around properly so that we get a good bond between the two pieces of wood. I'm going to stop right there, move on to this one. And if you need to add a little bit more glue, add a little bit more glue. We don't want to have it dripping all over the place, but you can get away with using a little bit of extra glue. We want to have some squeeze out, and I'll show you what squeeze out is in just a minute. All right, there we go. Nice, even gluing surface. That looks great. Now with this brush, I'm done gluing, so I'm going to go ahead and stick this back in that little jar there. Okay, now I'm going to lay these flat. Line them up where I want them. Now sometimes the orientation and the place that you have your boards is going to really matter a lot. So it might be a good idea to take a pencil and mark a line where you want it to be lined up. That'll help out a lot. So I'm going to set these a little bit closer, about right there, not super tight yet, just so that it's in position. Then I'll take this one, open it up, set that on top. Now I'm going to be really careful to make sure that it's flat across this surface. If you look really carefully here, you can see that I've got a little bit of a shoulder. I don't want shoulders. I want them to be even and straight and flat across. So kind of manipulate the joint a little bit until you get it right where you want it. Apply a little bit of clamping pressure. That'll help give you a little bit of persuasion. Move that around. All right, so I've got this mostly tight. Now I'm going to move out to the edge. It's important that you start in the middle and then work out to the edges. That's going to make life a little bit easier for you. So from here to here, I've got it pretty tight, or a pretty smooth joint. Okay, so I'm going to crank on this end because I've got it good and tight there. Then I'll come back here and I'm going to tighten this one up a bit more just so we don't get any movement. Then I'll move to this end. Now here I've got a pretty good shoulder. You're going to want to squeeze that shoulder down so that it's nice and flat all the way across. And then you can start cranking that down. Now you don't have to be Hulk to tighten these down enough. You just need to get them pretty snug. Okay, now that I'm done with my panel, I'm going to write my name on it, and then I'm going to set it over with some other panels to dry. Now let's check this CA glue. Now I'm going to be smart here. I'm not going to go poking it with my finger because I don't like having CA glue on my finger. I'm going to take the lid or another piece of wood or a pencil, something that's not my finger, and we're just going to check and see if that's dry yet. And it's not quite dry. Still needs a little bit more time. So we'll let that sit a while, and then once it's finished drying, then we'll go ahead and sand it down and make it smooth again. All right, so this is how we glue up a panel. Pretty easy. There's not much to it. Now, one thing that you will want to look at is the grain orientation, the end grain orientation specifically. So if you look right here, you'll see that the end grain arches this way. Okay? Like a frowny face. Okay, this one's frowning. This one goes the opposite way. This is smiling. We want to alternate between smiles and frowns. Okay, when we're gluing up big panels, it's especially important because if we have them all smiles or all frowns, our board is going to warp a lot. If we alternate them like this, then our board's not going to warp as much. It'll be a little wavy if it does warp, but it's not going to be near as noticeable. All right, now with this squeeze out here, that's perfect. That is the exact amount of squeeze out that you want. It looks pretty good on that side too. So, we've got a couple options here. We can take a wet paper towel and clean up that glue. Remember, water, it's water soluble. Or we can wait about a half hour to 45 minutes and it'll come off really easy with a glue scraper. If we wait overnight, it's gonna harden and we'll really be scraping. We might pull up some wood fibers with it. So we've got some options. You'll have to see which one you prefer. I myself like to wait about 45 minutes, half hour, and then get a scraper and it scrapes up really easily.